Welcome to a very important episode of Imperium Art. Our honored guest is well known and loved in our sphere of white identity politics. He's been a show host for RADIX for a long time, moderating discussions with some of our top minds. His intellectual dexterity and musical background make him a perfect inquisitor of Imperium Art. This is our 19th episode of Imperium Art. We've had philosophers and artists on, all of whom have challenged and illuminated the arts movement of the white positive sphere. The conversations have left us exuberantly exhausted. The hard work of digging for those golden moments of realization together, co-authoring Imperium Art has forged many friendships and laid the groundwork for future creators in our movement in Western kind. But tonight, Nullus and I are going to be put on the hot seat. We are going to be put through our paces. We have always invited critique, but tonight we're going to run the gauntlet of questions of our guests' rigorous investigation of Imperium Art. The challenge set to us by our guest will be no simple task. It will require us to reach deeper than we have so far on this show. It's my distinguished honor to welcome our guest and good friend, Josh Neal. How are you today, Josh?
It's a pleasure to be speaking to the two of you again. It's been a very long time. You're actually the second person to describe me as an inquisitor, so that's I've taken a liking to that. I think that would I'm very more than pleased with that description.
Excellent. Josh the Inquisitor. It's my next comic book character. I'll work on that. And also, as always, I'm pleased and honored to be in the company of the Hungarian American warrior poet himself, Nullus. How are you today, my friend?
Hi, how are you, Donald? It's a pleasure being here. Hello to the audience, and welcome, Josh, to this episode of Imperium Art.
So when we started off the Imperium Art investigation and documentation of the arts in our sphere, white identity politics, we opened it up this discussion to Tyler Hamilton, Josh Neal, and several other friends in our sphere. So at the time, Josh wrote an essay that was, I don't know, almost sort of more like a story with several questions. It's just really, really strong. And so he's going to read that today. And the first half kind of sets the stage. So the second half are numerous questions, which Nullus and I will try to address. So we'll have Josh read the first half, and then pause, and then we will respond after each paragraph after that. So, Joshua, would you like to go ahead?
Sure thing. So this is titled Questions for the Imperium Artist. Let me clear my throat for dramatic effect.
Yes, dramatic effect. We'll play some music in there later.
Yeah, right. Get some very light, cool jazz, just barely audible in the background. You want the audience to feel like they can see the mist and the smoke. Okay. Many times have I wandered the halls of the Guggenheim or the Museum of Modern Art, among other places, eager to take in the creative efforts on display, only to find myself tragically unmoved by the experience. While I'm no Philistine, neither am I a painter, sculptor, or artisan in any way. I do admire the craftsmanship and dedication necessary for creating such works of art, and have always believed that an appreciation for the arts is essential to a full life. However, it was not uncommon for me to take in some work considered great by others, only to walk away utterly perplexed, believing that I lacked a sufficient understanding of how and why these works were produced or for whom they were intended. I assumed that there was something wrong with me, that I was somehow, through some deficiency, unable to feel what was being presented to me. When I was younger, I had similar issues. Whenever I listened to jazz or progressive metal, I would listen knowing intellectually that these were testaments to the power of human creativity, but somehow my spirit went untransformed, unpenetrated by these works. Being a musician, this troubled me far more than my inability to experience a great foreign film or abstract painting, so I set upon correcting what I thought was a defect in my musical feeling. I began to approach new compositions as though I were back in grade school, dissecting some poor, undeserving amphibian. Clinically, and with a great deal of patience, I was like a phenomenologist of music, setting aside my immediate reactions, or lack thereof, so I could come to a better understanding of the meaning, the feeling of the music itself. These experiences served me well, as I now have a greater appreciation for different techniques and styles. Later, I would transfer these skills into other domains of art, though for obvious reasons, I'm still better at it when it comes to music. My artistic IQ, so to speak, definitely increased by a standard deviation, at least. Throughout all this, I could tell that something was still amiss. Where was the inspiration? Where was the feeling? It was all so labored and lacking immediacy. Understanding this piece or that composition was always predicated on the possession of some other knowledge or some earlier work. Rarely did I ever feel spoken to by an artist. As I gathered my thoughts in preparation for this essay, memories of a woman I knew 5 years ago flooded my mind. She was a talented singer and even more gifted as a songwriter. We would work closely together over the coming years, writing and performing with different ensembles. One warm summer night, I accompanied her as she was set to perform at an open mic held at a hostel in Manhattan. She was special, different from many other songwriters I had known. Though her compositions were simple, perhaps even embarrassingly so, whenever she sang, I felt emotions stir in me that were not often moved by the music of others. I found the experience intoxicating, but also more than a little humiliating. This woman's music made me feel more vulnerable than I knew I could be, and all she needed to do to cut me open was whisper one of her ethereal, enchanting melodies. I had grown used to treating art and music in particular as an exercise of the mind. It was a stoic process, little more. I had regarded this as a compensatory reaction, for surely I must have been some kind of alien who could not feel what others felt when they put on a song or stood before a painting. This is not to say that I never felt anything. In my adolescence, listening to Beethoven and Billy Joel, to name a few, I often felt a great deal. But this was rare, and as I got older, the experience occurred with ever-diminishing frequency. Remembering the way my old writing partner's music made me feel reminded me that music was supposed to make me feel alive, and not just sophisticated or in the know. Which brings me to the point of this essay. Recent conversations between Tyler Hamilton and Donald Kent, insert, and Gaius Nullus, on the subject of what is now being called Imperium Art, a project with large-scale political implications that seeks to embed the discipline of art within a context of white identity and nationalist sentiment, prompted me to read Leo Tolstoy's What is Art?, a book that had been sitting on my shelf ever since Donald's appearance in my program No Apologies late last year. Or I guess by now, 2 years ago. Not only did I find reading the book instructive, but I also felt vindicated by what Tolstoy had to say on the subject. Should we leave it there, or?
Yeah, I think that's good. And I did want to mention that I will put the link to that show. Actually, is that show? I think I have a link to that show on my American Zarathustra website. Some time ago, I asked you for a copy of the show, and I think that it's relevant to this discussion and this show. A lot of times it's great to follow up with some other show that brings greater context. We had an intensely rigorous discussion about art. We were covering my article in on art and critiquing postmodernism in the White People's Quarterly. So Nullus, did you want to go for that first and respond a little bit to the beginning of this essay?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first impression that I got when I read it and when you read it now, Josh, was a very honest confession of sorts of where everyone who's experiencing the ebbs and flows of this postmodern era is experiencing. I think that all of us were at one stage of our lives trying to figure out what is the creative process? What is our how do we express ourselves, either artistically or even politically? Because everything around us is felt alien and sort of distant in many ways. So I think that this was an excellent summary for the way many of us feel, of how we need to how we wanted to socialize in a world that kind of felt alien to us. I think that would be a good way of putting it. I think that the question that you bring up here about, what is art and what is missing in this postmodern world is the most important question. I think that when we talk about it, I actually wrote about this a little bit in my essay in the beginning, and I'll just read one paragraph, and I hope that kind of touches upon what you're also saying. So I'll just quote my essay here and say that the end of postmodernism signifies the bankruptcy of materialism and the epitome of self-gratification. The wellspring has dried up, and there is nowhere to take the audience. Through endless sequels, modern movies repetitively regurgitate the same themes to the point of exhaustion. In a futile attempt to revive Lazarus, so-called woke themes are inserted to elevate whichever victim class suits the specific narrative. The goal is to subvert expectation, yet achieves nothing more than a subversion of intelligence. So this, I think, touches upon your questioning your own intelligence on your own artistic IQ, so to speak, that it's not your fault, it's their fault. And I think that that's really what I wanted to get at with this point. I mean, there's a lot other points too, but Donald, please.
Okay. Thank you. Mine dovetails beautifully with what you just said. My position is that postmodernism is meant to alienate the public, to be exclusively for the elite class of liberals in their social hierarchy. Mm-hmm. Modern art has redeemable values, and our listeners may have to kind of Google the difference between postmodern and modern art. But postmodern art is explicitly anti-patriarchal and aligned with critical race theory. It's what I would call the anti-art. So the institutions of art and art education also align with that agenda. So it's much like what we see, just in general, where universities, TV commercials, and CNN all have somehow the same message, right? It's the same script in the art world as well. It hides in obscurity in some way, in such a way as to say, since this is called art and it's in a gallery or museum, then only the very stupid or low class would not understand or appreciate it, Right. So it's, later in your essay, Josh, you talk about the importance of creating an art that brings people together rather than separates them. Well, that's my point, is postmodernism is extremely hierarchical in that sense, that it's in a sense invented to alienate us. It's an overgrown weed in Western civilization, essentially. So there's another smaller topic within this story. It's a very, I don't know, as a story, it almost reads like a great little movie, and we're following you along in your experience. You are an artist, but yet you feel like an alien, and you can't, and you're losing your sense of being able to feel. It's kind of a tragedy. It's a disturbing tragedy. And then you find this sort of magical woman who's very enchanting, and she reminds you she brings you right back to ground zero of real art, real emotion. And you use this word in there that I'll have to look back and there how you phrase it, but you use the word that she made you feel vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And the word vulnerable is a little bit of that's your choice of word, but I just kind of want to say that we could, like an accordion, open that word up a lot wider and say that to some extent, when you're really experiencing art, you have to surrender to it. You have to enter the dream world of it. I think there's a song by Mazzy Star. Anybody know Mazzy Star? Fade Into You. Super simple. It's like a very, very slow country kind of song. and her voice, and my God, time just stops when you're listening to that song, and you become, quote, vulnerable. So the word vulnerable is, like white vulnerability or whatever, like, like it's, again, the left takes our words and recontextualizes it. But in this sense, it's a good thing and a beautiful thing and an essential thing. I'm not sure I like the term vulnerable because it's just been used poorly. But yes, art has to kind of remove you from yourself. You have to have a kind of a heightened existential experience in some way.
Well, Donald, maybe the word exposed could be a better expression of this.
Yeah, it's something we could think about. But
for sure, that's probably closer to. I guess I was trying to explain, or not being the most emotional guy around. Sometimes finding the right words, it does get a little bit difficult. But open, right? I mean, there's an expanse, like something moves.
Yeah.
There's a penetration. There's an exchange. All of the guardedness and
melts away.
Yeah, I mean, the typical kind of posturing and defensive aggression, like psycho-Freudian shit that goes on all day, just it's not there anymore, and it's just like pure confrontation with authentic experience or authentic being.
Yeah.
And it's vulnerable in the sense that it can hurt you, or it could not hurt you. I mean, it's a place where all the good things happen and all the bad things happen. I'm trying not to get too airy-fairy.
No, there's
your
sort
muse.
of a sweet thing. Amusing, yeah. Well, let's move on. Let's let Joshua continue with the next paragraph.
By all means.
So, for Tolstoy, art is a greatly misunderstood and abused, even discipline, whose history is full of competent plagiarists, gifted technicians, and self-serving charlatans, but few true artists. Preoccupied by Hegelian or Schopenhauerian notions of art as an expression of some abstraction, be it the will or some pure ideal, Tolstoy maintains that nothing which defines itself as such can be considered true art. Similarly, the utilitarian idea of art as that which produces pleasure, or the Socratic subordination of art to the good and the moral, Tolstoy tells us that these two cannot be considered real art. It would seem that Leo was a rather difficult man to satisfy. All the better for us, as it turns out.
Can I jump in then, right here?
Go ahead.
So in the indigenous Chinese philosophy of Taoism, Tao means the way in Chinese. And they say the way that can be named is not the way. And it's, to the casual viewer, that sounds very like, oh, some kind of a funny puzzle, something like that. But what I wanted to say is, first off, I do align with Tolstoy, but I also want to say that we have to widen the scope of the view of art. Art is not just raw emotion. It is also morality and structure, technique. So I would almost say that all of those other, Hegelian, Schopenhauer, these different approaches to defining art are also part of it. So that this is just something I wanted to kind of add to that point, that regarding Tolstoy's definition of art, I'd say it's accurate, but buttressed by the other points as pillars, per se. So art is both the creation of and practice of culture and individual, which sounds like paradoxical, which is why it's hard to name, right? So it's both material and spiritual. It's both earth and sky, in a sense, right? Art is a continuum of interface of existential experience made manifest. So the institutions and the people who consume art, the experiencers, gallery goers, they're as important as the artist and the art object themselves. An artist alone on an island creating little sculptures or something, it doesn't have its full life. It has to exist within culture. And artworks, art objects have a life of their own. They're like our children. You put them out and they're on their own now, So this encompasses the multitude of human experience and perception. It's quite hard to name. Nullus, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I fully agree with both positions, and I also think that what you just said is perfect, Donald. Again, I want to reference my essay and say that I mentioned this, how postmodernism is an epilogue, basically, to a struggle to break free of the metaphysical and organic representations of the human soul in its relation to nature, into the world that we live in, right? The everyday life that we have. So now we're in this desolate isolation and we don't have any guideposts. We're using obscure references. Some say postmodernism, postmodernism, or trans-postmodernism. I mean, they're trying to come up with terminology to define nothing. And so that's what we're trying to recontextualize with Imperium Art, and to say that we're seeking a method to place the soul of the European man back into the artistic creation.
Yes.
And thus we can break free from this perpetual maze of nihilism. That's sort of where I think that this is heading. But what Tolstoy said is absolutely on point, though. So it's very well, good source there.
Would you continue, Josh?
Sure. So then, what is art? According to Tolstoy, art is communication. It is the transmission of the feeling in one man's soul to another. It is intelligible, sincere, universal, and known. It facilitates the social feeling between men rather than alienate man from himself, his fellow man, and for Tolstoy, most importantly, from God. Art is not about the technical mastery inherent to a work, nor is it about the specificity or attention to detail which one can incorporate into their work. It is not an effort of intellectual labor meant to force the audience into a state of awed submission. When one transforms a unique emotional moment from a phenomenological experience into something socially communicable, only then has he performed a work of art. Whether or not we agree with Tolstoy's definition, it gives us something to think about when we consider the future of an Imperium art.
That's quite excellent. I mean, that's all quite excellent. I do feel like I want to respond to the notion of art is not about the technical mastery inherent to a work. So there's a problem here because, as I say, it's a continuum between the artist and the audience, and the art object is the communication between the two, and then how the art lives in culture does inform the artist then for the next product, etc. So here's the problem: a lot of artists today are, and the audience of art, or the greater culture, they are kind of they love the eye candy. The most common question I get asked is, how long did it take you to draw that? And every artist grinds their teeth, or visual artist grinds their teeth when they hear that, because that's no measurement whatsoever of the value of art, like how much time I put into it. It has nothing to do. That's just not the point, So and they'll judge things about how much detail is in it. If there's more detail, then it's better. And this is absurd. So I'm not really a huge fan of, say, Vincent van Gogh, for example, but he is an excellent example of someone who was very ham-fisted and had very poor technique, but was brilliant in terms of his expression, and extraordinarily powerful in terms of the soul or the spirit of art, as it were. He's obviously a very tragic character, and that opens up a whole new can of worms. In the art world, every art student is asked, okay, who do you want to be, Picasso or Van Gogh? And do you want to die poor and penniless but have the greatest spiritual impact on the world, or do you want to be this kind of rich, famous, drive a fancy car, lots of girls, other guy that's sort of more modernistic and elite, in the sense that it's a break away from tradition, and it's like elitist in a way. So a lot of this, speaking as an artist, a working artist and art educator, I'm really frustrated with the lack of education in the public, that they don't know how to measure art. They don't understand art, and which is obviously part of why we do these shows. But I'm sorry, just wanted to put my 2 cents in there. Nullus, would you like to respond?
Yeah, actually, I find this very interesting. I'm going to try to break this down a little bit. There is an argument to be made, and this ties into the first half of the essay that you wrote, Josh. There's an argument to be made for immoral artists capable of creating great works of art, great works of aesthetic art, or great works of art, period. There's an argument to be made that, for even St. Thomas Aquinas speaks about this, where he looks at art more as a craft than it does as a kind of an existential inspiration, if you will. But what he does say is that whether the artist knows it or not, they have a part of that metaphysical in them, even though they might not be representing it consciously. So what this is interesting is because I just today, or I think it was today, I think Hirath posted something on Twitter, and then I responded to her, and it inspired me to think about, yes, she posted something with Kate Bush, a song from Kate Bush, and then I remembered that song from Peter Gabriel, "Don't Give Up." I don't know if you both of you know this song.
Yeah, I know that.
Now, he wrote this song for a completely different purpose. His song was about social woes, and it was a very socialist sounding song. And Peter Gabriel in general is a very woke individual, just to be very polite. Yeah. But suffice it to say, that song spoke to me years ago already as a nationalist. So I've always felt myself as a nationalist, and so many years ago, when I heard that song, I could identify with it. And there's nothing in the language that would suggest that it was something about anti-Thatcherism or whatever it was, right? To me, that song represented something else. And and if you read it now, it could be in theory, or in a sense, an anthem of nationalism in a way. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Now, Peter Gabriel might not have had that intention, but his upbringing, his background, his whole cultural milieu, his socialization, all had him lead to express himself in this particular way, right? So you might have artists that, if you go into maybe the more extreme examples of some, immoral artist who's deliberately immoral, they're still using a wellspring, and they're still using a source material that is moral, even if they don't want to use it, or if they're trying to destroy that particular morality. So this argument could be made there. Now, again, I'm not advocating for, immoral art, obviously, but I do think that it makes it somewhat complex in understanding our appreciation of art in general, overall. And how this ties into Imperium Art is exactly how we try to distinguish ourselves, by being more explicitly geared towards that collective morality, geared towards that collective consciousness, and where we are drawing from that wellspring in a very conscious and deliberate manner. So that's pretty much where I wanted to stay, because I don't want to go off on a tangent with this. So, yeah. But I hope that this made sense, what I'm trying to get at.
Beautifully said. Beautifully stated.
Josh, do you wanted to add anything to any of the comments that we have, by the way?
Do you feel are we answering your questions?
Let's save it for the end, because I think the big questions, the ones that I was really interested in, come in the last quarter or so of the essay. But I'm just absorbing. So should I continue?
Yes, please.
Art is a cultural technology, one that, if used properly, may bind us together, but when used improperly, breaks us apart. Like RADIX's resident mythologist Mark Brauman, Tolstoy also extols the link between religion and art. When the European people turned away from the biblical scriptures, Tolstoy tells us that was the moment art first started to become something else. Though I am hardly a Christian, one need not wonder for too long as to what kind of effect the lack of a genuine and coherent religious sentiment has had on us as a people.
I'm sure Nullus has a lot to say about that. Do you want to?
Well, I'll keep it simple on this one, because I think that I always reference this, because ever since I found this quote and read this essay from T.E. Hulme, I've always found this quote very fascinating, and I think that it does tie into a lot of the questions that we have both in our sphere and also outside of the sphere, on how we relate to the metaphysical, the divine, and to God, and to the absolute morality that God represents. So what he says here in his essay titled Speculations, I'll quote it, just as in the case of other instincts, nature has her revenge. The instincts that have their right and proper outlet in religion must come out in some other way. You don't believe in a God, so you believe that man is a God. You don't believe in heaven, so you begin to believe in a heaven on earth. In other words, you get romanticism. The concepts that are right and proper in their own sphere are spread over and so mess up, falsify, and blur the clear outlines of human experience. It is like pouring a pot of treacle over the dinner table. Romanticism, then, and this is the best definition I can give of it, is split religion. And I think that this quote from T.E. Hulme, and again, I use it very often, but I find this to be a very apt quote in our current relationship with the divine. And I think that this is an important question that we have to ask ourselves, how we relate our art to a higher purpose.
Mm-hmm. So if I can jump in as Nullus, may I jump in?
By all means.
Okay. So looking at this, as an art educator, one has to become quite familiar with art history. And it's always struck me quite, amazingly that, as we look through the history of Western art, there's this enormous and dominant period of Christian art. And there's a great deal of progress and change in techniques, obviously in painting, but of course, architecture, music. Somehow the Christian religion in some way did great things for art, and probably the opposite is true. So, and then, well, I guess the point I'm trying to make, though, is that we have to try to get like a sort of a bird's eye view of almost the epoch that we're in, at least the era that we're in, what I call the age of white replacement, or the age of white genocide. And we're walking on a tightrope across this age to get to the other side. And, we have to, in a sense, in Imperium Art, what we're trying to do is reach back to our past and link it to our future. That's one of the objectives of this project, and both consciously and unconsciously. But it's obvious within our culture if you look at any of the White Art Collective, etc. So how do we do that? How do we see that we artists are in a civilizational battle against our enemies and adversaries in other cultures? We know who they are. Well, I'll tell you something that I have that I bring to the table, and that I wish other people had these eyes too. So I spent a large part of my life studying Asian art. I lived in Asia for 5 years. Some people are probably sick of hearing this, but I would just like to say, though, that if you were to do that with any art, Native American art, Aboriginal art, African art, whatever, you deeply, deeply research it, you begin to see clearly, well, this is a biospirit. This is the Eastern biospirit, Japan and China specifically. And it's so easy to identify the cultural and spiritual identity of those people as a race and an ethnicity. So from so many years of deeply, deeply going in there and being able to produce like authentic looking Chinese paintings, for example, that Chinese people can't tell that an American painted them, or that they pour over me with compliments about the spirit of it is so beautiful. I'm turning around now and putting that attention and putting those eyes on Western art. And I wish that everybody had a chance to just live for some time in a non-Western country, long enough to know and feel deeply their own Western biospirit. And then when they come home, in some way you're super Western. There's something about it. It's just a very, very heightened existential awareness. So if we can have this kind of Western biospirit awareness and a historic awareness of where we are as creators, I feel that we can make better Imperium art, and that kind of helps us move forward. Christianity had I'm not saying that it's over or should be over. I'm not anti-Christian in any way. I just feel that was a time in history. What should we do? How can we have to decide that I'm not going to determine those things or dictate those things. That's why we invite people on this show. We're co-authoring this. There's different spheres, right? We've got our pagans, we've got our Christians, we've got atheists, we've got Apollonians. It's a very, and we could even break those down into other categories. It's quite a really amazing table to sit at with all these different cultures that are within the Western biosphere. So it's up to each one of those groups, per se, to stand up and make their culture and make it strong and relevant to our day, our time, our experience of white genocide.
I think, Donald, if I can add to that, only that we need to recognize that this is as much a spiritual struggle as it is a civilizational struggle. Once we understand that this is a fight for our spirit, we also have to then ask our questions, well, what is our spirit and where does our spirit belong? And then we have to delve into the issue of the continuity of our biospirit, of our collective consciousness, but also of the will of God in this context. And we have to understand and put ourselves in a position to subordinate ourselves in a way to this divine, because that provides a certain level of humility that we require in order for us to be strong. And I know it sounds a little it's somewhat of a contradicting theme, but in a way, you have to subordinate and show humility, but you're not showing it towards another individual. What you're showing is a respect for this divine. You're showing the respect for something that's above you, that's more important than you as the individual. And once you recognize that there are forces, there are important themes that are more important than your petty needs, personal needs, then everything starts to flow a little bit differently. And then when you look at this in terms of a continuity, many speak of the term logos as a theme, and logos is a very uniquely European theme. It's a theme of understanding the word, understanding what the word of God is. And, the Christian argument in this would be to say that the ancient Greeks had a certain level of understanding of logos, but they didn't have a full understanding of logos. And then this, through the continuity, evolved in Christianity to have a full picture of logos. Now, again, this is the Christian argument for it, and I'm not here to dictate this particular, although I do believe in it, but I don't want to force this on everyone. Just to move forward with that, the idea of logos, though, is very important. And the idea of understanding what the word means is very important. And this also, again, ties into our connection with the metaphysical, which I think is a very important aspect of our artistic expression.
So I'm going to jump onto that tail of that quickly and shortly to just essentially say, I was looking at Tyler Hamilton wrote something on Twitter today about how people leave the dissident right because of the way of the infighting, essentially. And I feel that if these different camps could find a singular point, a spiritual point to agree on, whatever we call it, and use that as our central pillar from which we all hold on to, because the mission is first. The mission is first. Ego, cult of personality, those things are actually helping our enemies more than anything. And so, that's where humility comes in. So I don't want to go on and on. We've gone.
Well, we are going to touch upon this later in the essay that Josh wrote. So I think that we can push that down.
All right, Joshua.
Much, though not all, of modern art is alienation writ large, something that every right-leaning person knows intuitively. There is a clear opening for a new artistic paradigm to be ushered in and restore art and culture to its former glory. Excuse me. Is Imperium Art that paradigm? I do not know, but I would like to contribute whatever I can to this conversation. Tolstoy remarked that no philosopher, aesthetician, Aesthetician. That is right. Okay. Or artist has ever successfully defined art. If that is correct, then assuredly I will fail in my attempt to bring any greater clarity to this problem. So, too, may an Imperium Art fail. Still, we must try, for that is our lot as men. Just move on to the next paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
Some questions, then, for those who would seek an imperial art. Is art always political? Should it be? Is it not true that rightist culture creators decry the politicization of art? If so, then is more of the same the answer? Is art an end in itself, or is it for some purpose? Does it exist outside of our political ambitions as a device for the cultivation of truth, love, and knowledge, or should we think of it as does the evolutionary scientist or the Soviet censor? Tolstoy believed that the upperclassmen killed art by restricting it from the common man. Should Imperium art be universal or aristocratic? Should art be intelligible, or are mystery, ambiguity, and withholdingness good for art? What is beautiful to the artist of the Imperium, and what values should he strive to produce through his art? Why does the Imperium artist create art in the first place? So there's a whole lot there. Maybe take a big breath and chew on that.
Yeah. If I can kind of jump in. So one thing earlier you were talking about is Imperium Art creating a new paradigm. And the question specifically was, would it return us to our former glory? And this is something we've kind of covered before. And I've said a little bit here, we're not living in the past, but yet we're drawing from the past. We're at the sort of archaeofuturism. So, and then I don't know if this was a typo or you meant to say imperial art with an L. So I just want to distinguish for the audience, that's quite a huge difference. So a distinction between imperial art and imperium art is critical. We are not colonists. If anything, we seek to recolonize ourselves, our cultures, our histories, our lands, to bridge our past and future. So that's just a kind of an important thing that we want to get across. Nullus, did you want to jump in on some of the questions?
Yeah, actually, just to add to what you're saying, what we're speaking of here is a continuity. And I think that is a major running theme in Imperium Art, is understanding this as a continuity, not as reaching back and return to tradition, to a past that we had or may not have had. We have to objectively look at this continuity for all its positives and negatives. There are moments in our history that were not as glorious as other times in our history. There were movements and ideas throughout our continuity that might have been more destructive than constructive. So I think that we still have to take all of these aspects into consideration as a way for us to formulate a message for the future generations so that they understand where we're coming from. So our goal is really just to reconnect these broken links in this continuity so that we can understand how we got to where we are and how we have to change in order to move forward. In terms of the questions, is art always political and should it be? I would say no, it doesn't have to always be political. I think that there's a lot of beautiful works that were written in the heat of romance or simping, as they call it today, right?
No, it's let's volley each question so that we keep it tight.
Yeah, let's keep it with the question. So, is art always political? No, it's not always political. And should it be? No, it shouldn't be. I think that this also ties into this issue of embracing the full emotional spectrum. We don't always feel political. Sometimes we're confused in our own thoughts. We're lost in our own thoughts. Sometimes we fall in love with somebody. Sometimes we are disappointed by other people. So there's many different human interaction aspects that we need to express in art. And should it be? Well, I would say aspects of art should be political. And I think that being political in art is very important. And I'm not trying to dismiss its value. And I think that Imperium Art in particular will have a stronger focus on the political if you want to put it in those terms. So Imperium Art would be a more political expression of the emotional spectrum. I think that would be a better way to kind of phrase it.
So Nullus and I offline have discussions about this, and we don't agree on everything, and that's okay. And even some of our guests don't agree on everything. We've had interesting discussions with John from Lilo and John. Handsome Horse was a fantastic inquisitor, and it's like I said, we co-author this. So I think in a sense you have your own answer, and then there's the answer. So I'm kind of advocating for myself, and I actually lean more towards a yes. So is Imperium Art always political? I think it is. And should it be? To some extent, yes. It must be at least aware of the crisis of white replacement. If now, you've heard beautiful songs. You've even heard songs that don't have lyrics. Dissident Volk. It's but it can. How do I say? If it doesn't have a root in awareness of white genocide and the crisis that we're facing, a root in something of our history, I can't define it as Imperium Art. So now, let's say if I can write a love song, and I have a love song on my YouTube channel, and I even say, like, this is not a political song. I'm not only going to produce this kind of art, but it's a different kind of art, right? I can make Chinese paintings, right? That's a different kind of art. But I advocate more that Imperium Art be politically, intentionally political, put it that way. So I'll read the next question. Is it not true that rightist culture, right-wing culture creators decry the politicization of making political art? So I guess that, to me, the question is yes and no. I mean, we criticize leftist political art, but we wouldn't criticize our, ideology in art. So I don't think that it's so bad, but I also think, there has to be a balance. If so, then is more of the same the answer, right? It's a tough question because we're in a culture war. And Nullus often says, we've lost the culture war. And this is an important point that he makes. And so I feel, in a sense, well, that's why it should be political to some degree. Is art an end in itself, or is it for some purpose? That's a broader question. I guess I would want to steer more towards what is Imperium Art rather than what is art. I can, as an art educator, I can obviously talk about that. Nullus, did you want to jump in at some point?
Yeah, I think right here I would touch upon my essay again about where I try to distinguish between three different types of expressions of Imperium Art. Mm-hmm. And one is the organic representation of Imperium Art, which is represented by our mythology, our religion, our folk music or folk traditions, if you will. And I consider these like almost like a wellspring of and in a sense, we're a curator of this wellspring, so we must consciously preserve this. What I do, and then the second level would be the more kind of implicit expression of Imperium Art, which I find that you have artists that will touch upon certain topics, but they won't explicitly they won't use explicit language about that particular topic, but when you read it, you know exactly what they're talking about, if that makes any sense. And then the third, you have a very explicit kind of propagandistic style of Imperium Art. And I think that those are the three different kinds of Imperium Art that I see in terms of categories, if you will. And another point that I was thinking about recently was we have to move away from thinking of our traditions, of our mythology, of our past, because all of this is alive in us today. Folk music is alive all over the United States and Europe and elsewhere in our biosphere. So we are not, we shouldn't treat this as a museum. We need to treat this as a living organism. But we have to be more conscious in the purpose of preserving it as a curator.
So the real meat here, I think, is this question that kind of refers back to Tolstoy. So should art be how do I say it? Should it be universal or aristocratic? That's a very interesting, universal, I feel, is spiritual. Aristocratic is material in the sense that it's worldly. It's about class. And I have to, it's extremely hard for me to choose between those two because I want them to be both. I think that, aristocratic in the sense that we're distinguishing ourselves from the degenerate left from postmodernism. So in that sense, we're above that art, much above, and that there could even be. But at the same time, we can have punk rock too. We can have Emily Eucas. We can have different kinds of expressions that are fun, and they don't have to be so-called high class. But at the same time, it is distinct. It's aristocratic from the left, above the left. Universal only in that we care about our people, we care about our culture, our history, our future, our children, our traditions, etc. So it doesn't have to be universal for the Chinese or the Africans or the Puerto Ricans or whoever you can think of. God bless them. They can enjoy it. They can be our allies. But this is for our family. So that's how I would define universal. What are your thoughts, Nullus?
This is that difficult question that John from Lilo and John posted when we had that conversation with him.
Right.
And his argument was we should be unapologetically aristocratic, and we should be open about being discriminating in what we define as Imperium art. But at the same time, I like the way you formulated it just now by saying, in relation to the left, for example, we can be that way. But should we be that way in regard to our own spheres? And there's an argument again to be made that not every piece of dissident right art is Imperium art. And this is something that I'm struggling with as well. Because I think that, there are days where I feel that we should be more exclusive. And then there are days where I feel that we should be more inclusive. And it's a very subjective kind of question to figure out. So for me, at the moment, I'm still wavering between the I wouldn't say universal by any means. I mean, so Imperium art should not be universal. And this maybe is a point that we should make. The problem we have today is that anything that's considered European art is considered universal. In other words, you can come from any corner of the globe and you can be a part of the European artistic experience. But if you go to Japan, then you're not really a part of the Japanese artistic experience. You're always going to be an outsider. And so we have to veer away from this mentality where we, because this is also kind of a virtue signaling in a way, where we're trying to express a kind of passive aggressive superiority in the sense that what we're saying is that our art is the best because everybody likes it and everybody's following it. And again, there's a certain kind of truth to that. But you also run the risk of then having invasive elements coming and appropriating your art as their own.
Right.
And so what you're really struggling with is on the universal level, like, at least, is that you have to distinguish and you have to say, no, this is not yours. This is ours. You're a guest, and you can play. You can, I mean, I'm very happy to see Yo-Yo Ma playing. I'm not, and I'm not against, Chinese violinists playing in a very mechanical kind of cold way or whatever. But I mean, I'm not against any of that. But I think that they need to understand that this doesn't belong to their traditions, and they don't have a say in this. They're guests, and so we need to have this kind of mentality that it is something we're willing to share with you, but it is ours, and it has to be ours. Now, whether it's aristocratic or is it more common, maybe that would be, again, that's a kind of a snobbish way of putting it, but Lilo and John said that I'm somewhat of a snob, so maybe I'll just go with it.
Might be more of a European perspective than a North American perspective too. I'm really curious what Josh thinks about all this as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
I haven't had a chance to hear his response to anything.
Well, I asked the questions because I don't have the answers. So Tolstoy, for example, he condemns the upper class aristocratic approach to art, and he condemned a lot of people that a lot of famous composers that many of us would consider to be the greatest musicians to have ever lived. He had very damning words to say about Wagner, for example.
Wow.
I want to say he had very damning words for Bach as well, and we think of those as the pillars of great art, European art,
Western
German art.
Sure.
So, and Spengler would probably say that there's a lot about Tolstoy's perspective that has to do with unique qualities of the Russian soul. Spengler said that Russians were all peasants. That was the Russian soul, and that was not with any discriminatory or moral weight, but just to describe, the character of the Spanish man versus the Englishman, the Frenchman, the Prussian, and the Russians.
I see.
And I think there are a few points in the book where Tolstoy talks about how important the folk style was, and how close to real art that was. I am of two minds when it comes to every question here.
Yeah.
Which is what makes it difficult for me. I guess in the grand, there has to be an uncompromising esteem for high quality technicality, maintaining a sense of continuity, as Nullus was saying before. There has to be a noblesse oblige attitude to art.
Yep.
That there is a standard. So this is an argument I have with my brother all the time. I tell him that there's such a thing as objectively good music, and he says that there's no such thing as objectively good music.
I agree with you, Josh.
And I can't, when he's pressed me on it, I can't tell him what criteria I'm judging this by. I just know that it is true that there's objectively good and objectively bad music. Now maybe one day I'll sit down and have my little autistic shit fit and write down the Josh Neal rules of what makes something objective. Excellent. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But I mean, it when you hear it. You compare Silverchair to Yes. We know that one is objectively good. We know that the other is objectively bad. You compare Rick James to Fetty Wap. We know one is objectively good. We know the other is objectively bad. You compare Yes to Wagner. We know one is objectively superior and the other is not. Now, subjectivity tells us which do we like more.
There you go.
And what are the qualities that we hold something to be of greater or lesser value, esteem, et cetera, et cetera. So let's run through these point by point. I'll make it pretty quick.
So
is art always political? Let me go ahead.
Oh, no, well, I'm just helping you find the questions. Should art be intelligible or mystery, ambiguity, withholdingness? I'm an advocate for, I feel that it's really essential to have what I would say a little cognitive dissonance. There must be some holding back. There must be something esoteric. There must be room for interpretation, and not to the absurd level of meaninglessness, postmodernism. So that's a very delicate dance that the creator has to do, whereby it's not an instructional manual, it's a poem. You see what the difference is? It can't smack you in the face too hard. That would be garbage, basically.
If I could interject quickly on this, I think that this distinction of the three types of Imperium art. So the organic representation, be represented by folk music, for example, just to give an example of folk music. Then you have the more ambiguous, open-ended art, with a lot of metaphors and kind of open-ended questions. That would be the more implicit form of Imperium art. And then you do have, this fast wave kind of very direct, in-your-face kind of artistic expression, maybe somewhat similar to the Futurists in a way, although the Futurists like to destroy tradition. So, I always say that with that caveat. But suffice it to say, you have these different classifications of Imperium art, at least in my mind. And so when I say that there's these different categories, I'm not talking about the objectively good versions of these categories. So you can have folk music that's objectively good, and you could have folk music that's just objectively bad. I mean, I hate to say it. And there could be works of art that were, people want to express themselves implicitly, and it just doesn't work. Something's missing. And so we have to be very careful in how we differentiate the technical talent, the technical ability of the artist with the message that they're representing. And I think that's also an aspect to take into consideration. And then that ties into that other question about whether Imperium, whether it should be intelligible, mystery, or ambiguity, or things like that.
Well, to that point, I know obviously that what's centrally important to the two of you in this project is addressing the identitarian, racial, civilizational aspects in your art. As we're talking about this, what stands out to me, I think, is the most important part, or the most important focus for me is it should be anti-capitalist. And I don't mean that in a like communist rock way where there's like something aesthetic about it, or there's a fixatedness on Marx or capitalism in every aspect of the songwriting, like the punk rock ethos of several decades ago.
Mm-hmm.
Should art be intelligible, mysterious, ambiguous? There should be room for all of these things.
Yeah.
But it's the spirit of money and the industriousness of art that I think problematizes all of these things. I think the bigger issue is the way in which we as Faustian man, Western man, European American man, what have you, over the last 100 years have come to understand art and music, how we've come to experience and consume these things. The first, what would be a good example of this? I can't give a specific example, but like you have a super group that gets together, and it's all these great platinum selling artists, and they get together and maybe they record a really great album. And then because of the capitalist model, the business model, the money spirit, well, they have to do another album, and then another album after that. Mm-hmm. And 15 years goes by and none of it was special anymore. And maybe it had a deleterious effect on culture creation and like the vocabulary of the consuming public and things like that. David Lynch is ambiguous. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's terrible. Steven Spielberg is always intelligible. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's terrible. I think an Imperium art would be diverse and inclusive of the different approaches, but it would be decidedly not in the spirit of money and industry.
Correct. I would agree with that. I think that's an insightful look at it. And it opens up the question, your next question, which is what is beautiful to the artist of the Imperium? For example, just how do we, as Imperium artists, define beauty? And beauty is clearly central to art. So you're saying what should he strive to produce through his art? So I think what we can tell just from what we currently see in the art movement there's a very strong kind of Greco-Roman aesthetic. Of course, you've got your Fasc Wave aesthetic, you've got your 80s aesthetic, archaeofuturism. I do feel that we're really in an infancy stage. We're really quite early in this movement and this racial awakening, white globalism, if like I like to call it. And I think beauty will change and grow, but at the moment, our definition of it will grow, but at the moment, we seem to be looking back towards something classical, some kind of classicism, not so much romanticism. I mean, I had somebody discuss with me on YouTube that why couldn't there be Imperium postmodernism? You just simply use the structure of conceptual art and inject our ideas into that structure. And I kind of feel like, why would I want to wear my enemy's shoes or something, in a sense that you could infiltrate it, but I don't feel that that's a worthwhile venture, but it is a legitimate question, though. And that's an anti-beauty in a sense. But what are your thoughts, Nullus?
Yeah, I think the interesting point here is tying into the moral. So what is beautiful to the artist of the Imperium, and what values should he strive to produce through his art? I think that this ties into the relationship between the artist and the divine, and the absolute morality that we're striving toward. Again, moralizing. So presenting a moral message without moralizing, if that makes any sense. So we're not trying to point that moral finger at everyone. What we're trying to do is present a moral message through example. And what we're saying is, at least in my view, what we're saying is that we are reconnecting that relationship, that metaphysical relationship, and again, this ties into the motivation of the artist, right? So why does the Imperium artist create art in the first place? And so the motivation of the artist, in my view, is looking to not only preserve something, but they're looking to create a home. They're looking to create a message for the future. They're looking to create a message for their contemporaries as well. So what they're trying to really do is provide a kind of a space where people can then go out of space and time into this art, whatever it is, whether it's a song, a poem, a story, a painting, or what have you, and they can then envision themselves in that work of art, so that they can understand the continuity, they can understand the contextualization of where they stand with the absolute morality. That's the goal towards which we're striving to be better than we were yesterday, and also to have a message and a view of the future, where we're going with all of this. So I think these are elements that should motivate at least the Imperium artist, and I believe it does for the most part. And I think that this part is really the most poignant point in understanding the differentiation between what we're trying to achieve and what's, let's just call it, for lack of a better term, this modernist, postmodernist world that we're living in.
So if I can tag on that, the question Josh posed, why does the Imperium artist create art in the first place? You can't really get any more core than that. And that there's a few things I wanted to say. One is essentially, if you look at Jack White's song Sky King, about this man who killed himself in a blaze of glory, and I won't get a break because I'm a white guy, and we are channeling intense angst and anger, and there's just a great deal of pain when you finally see the whole picture of who's trying to erase whites, Europeans, and why and how they're doing it, and how most of our brothers in the Anglosphere and the European diaspora are, if I can use that word, they're falling for it, and they're even running towards their own destruction. There's an exquisite pain that comes out of that. It must come out in some form. It can come out in violence, or it can come out in art. And I feel that art is the productive way. And so one of the next stage there is that why do we do this? To create community. I talked about the continuum of art. You create art, you send it out, it's your baby, you send it out in the world, people respond to it, and then that comes back to you. That validates, informs, and the artist grows through that experience, and then the continuum goes on and on. We're all in this together. So, and then that community grows and grows and grows. I think right now we're very insular, and I don't mean that as an insult. I just mean that our ideas are kind of illegal. They're suppressed and censored, right? So I think we need to continue to try to grow and push our ideas into the mainstream and increase our community. So those are the two sides that kind of, earth and sky. The sky being the pain, the interior, non-material suffering, and the knowledge that we have, and then manifesting it into the world and onto the earth. So maybe Joshua can continue on with the next paragraph. At the risk of being a subversive.
At the risk of being a subversive and challenging men whom I greatly respect, is Imperium Art even a desirable goal? Would it not be better to focus on the artist, to teach the art of living, so that we may rear generations of competent artists who are capable of revealing themselves through their creation? How do we teach people to identify their feelings so that they may communicate true emotional expression through their work? Would it serve us to ask who is an artist rather than what is art? Rather than intellectualize the artistic process or politicize it, should we not instead seek to liberate the soul of the artist, to free him from the constraints of narcissism, mediocrity, and the pursuit of material success and fame?
Well, there's a lot to cover there. Something I think I'd like to say is that better to focus on the artist instead of ideology or the movement. This question here, is it better? I would like to create an Imperium Art Guild or an institute for this very purpose. I would love that if we had our own kind of Imperium Art College, let's say. This is a future vision, right? Whereby we could train our people, our artists, how to do just those things you were asking. But this whole conversation is two-sided coin, basically. Why would we do that? So that we can then produce culture, strengthen our communities, have a future, these kinds of things. So there's much still to be done, but everything every creator is doing now in the white positive sphere is the groundwork for future generations. Something like, let's say, what the Beatles is to rock and roll. Our creators will set the bar, define the arts. From there, other creators will have a cultural vector to react to. Try to imagine, 10 years from now, or even 4 years from now. We can look 4 years ago, when Pepe came on the scene, and then this, that, and the other thing, and now it's kind of formulated. Where will it be 4 years from now? We'll always have. We're creating a history or a lineage. So this is just my thoughts on that. That I could go on and on, but I want to give Nullus a little chance to respond as well.
I get the point of it. I think that if you just focus on the particular values as opposed to the explicit message, then you should theoretically achieve the same goal. That's kind of the argument, I guess, where you could say that if you present a good and solid structural understanding of art, and repositioning that, the artist to understand their ability to express their honesty, as opposed to having some other kind of motivation, whether it's driven through fear or material success. I mean, sometimes, artists are also afraid to express themselves, even though, they might call themselves bold and courageous and all these empty words. They many times they're very dependent on those that actually provide them with the means to live a relatively normal life. So the material means, I mean. So and this goes back even throughout history. You're always going to have a patron that supports the arts and what have you. So the dilemma is there, and it's a valid dilemma. But I think that what we're talking about here is that the artist has been given quite a bit of freedom in the past, say 100 years, and they really got lost in this freedom that they had. I think that what we're saying is we're not imposing values of specific kind to anyone in that sense. I mean, even though we do represent these values, and we're not saying that you have to be this way to be an artist. What we're saying is that if you want to be a part of this Imperium Art program, this concept, then there are going to be very specific values, moral values, identity values, things that relate to who you are, where you come from. And so these aspects have to be taken into consideration if you want to be a part of this Imperium Art community. And there's a good point also to be made about over-intellectualizing the artistic process or even politicizing it. When we talk about over-intellectualizing it, we can leave that to the intellectuals, if you will. Let everyone argue their points on what they believe is art. That's the art critic, right, if you will. And the politicization of it, the politicization of art is also one of those careful tightropes that we have to be careful of, that it's not taken out of context and used against us, or used for purposes that maybe aren't representative of the artist. So again, that these are valid concerns. But I think that what we're talking about really is setting a kind of a foundation of understandable values, understandable goals, to understand the purpose of why we are trying to talk about this topic at all. And because I think that once you free the artist, we have to be, without a moral foundation, a free artist will fall into the trap of narcissism, mediocrity, and the pursuit of material fame and success. That's exactly the problem I see.
Well, I would disagree slightly, only on a minor point, because there's so much of what you're saying that obviously I think resonates and gets at important points. And just to elaborate, I wrote a lot of these questions not even really with anything underneath them, just to kind of like poke into the air and see what little nuggets of wisdom they get out of people who are trying to answer them. So many of these questions don't even necessarily have, say, a direction that they're pointing at, but rather just to get people to explicate things. But I don't think that the 20th century is the century of the artist getting lost in the freedom and the liberty that they have. I think it's the visionary archetype, if you want to call them the artist or the shaman or the poet, whatever, was inframed, was captured. I think of like all of those great movies in the maybe late 70s to late 80s. Legend is one example where there's this like nefarious demon character trying to capture this angelic, sprightly, hopeful, optimistic, creative entity. I think in Legend they're going after the unicorn specifically, if I remember correctly. But anyway, and I kind of view that as what happened to visionary archetypal. I guess Giorgiani would call it the Promethean man. And maybe Mark Brauman would call it the Apollonian man, whatever, different names for all the same thing.
Sure.
But that essence, I think, was constrained and contaminated, and I think it was explicitly the industrial, financial forces, I don't want to get too edgy here, racial forces that are responsible for that. And I don't think the artist lost his way because of all of this plethora of opportunity and options and amoral pursuit of expression that was there. I think he was guided, held by the hand, walked on a particular path.
Yeah, I can see that.
Like a You know, the classic maybe example would be the young woman who thinks she's going to be a movie star or a theatrical actress, and then ends up with a heroin addiction and HIV.
Right. Yeah. Right. Right. I mean, maybe the way of expressing it is this is a more libertine kind of approach. What we're seeing today is more of a kind of a deceitful kind of promise of freedom, but it's not really freedom, as opposed to when you have your foundations, then you are literally open to go any direction as long as, because the foundations are there to keep you grounded. The foundations are there to help you understand yourself. And then once you have those foundations, and I guess it comes down to education as well. You know, the more you read, the more you understand, the more you try to ask the right questions. That's when that's when you're really free, right? You're free because you understand certain things. I mean, even in Christianity, they talk about this freedom that once you realize, once you have that epiphany, once you understand your place in the world, so to speak, that's when you really feel a true kind of a liberation, if you will, of the soul, right? And that's when your soul can really express itself best. So yeah, that's actually a very good point that you made.
Your next questions, Josh, actually opened this up even deeper. So would you continue?
Sure. What is it about the revolutionary right that struggles to understand art and the artistic process? Would an Imperium Art not create a culture of conformity and ideological rigidity, which are the opposite of art? Should not the artist be his own self, absent the impulse to imitate, to posture, and to self-obfuscate? Artists are visionaries. Would an Imperium Art be little more than a blindfold over their eyes? Should we not encourage contemplation among our creators so that they may see more clearly?
Yeah, this ties in actually, Donald, to what I just said.
Mm-hmm.
This exactly ties into what I just said, and I think that we really are not trying to impose, you know, a rigid set of rules to say that you have to follow, let's say, you know, points 1 through 5, and if you can't follow these points 1 through 5, then you can't be a part of the Imperium Art project. I mean, I don't think that we've ever really expressed it that way, but it's an important question that Josh brings up, and it's an important question that we also have to sort of discuss and understanding ourselves in it.
So these questions, interestingly, if I may say, are kind of from a liberal mindset. And I'm not saying I'm not qualifying that as good or bad, but I'm saying those are almost the typical or normal questions you would ask to determine the authenticity of art. Mm-hmm. So, but we kind of have to always be cognizant of the fact that we don't want to work from within that paradigm. We want to create our own paradigm. And so, like the sense of conformity, okay, don't be careful, don't become, a conformist. So if you turn the word conformity around, it could be something like, cultural uniformity. Okay, so, if we look at cultural arts, for example, that they're specifically a certain way, right? A certain rhythm or a certain style. So it's not about. I feel that the liberal mindset is always a risk-taking mindset. It's not unnatural. It's the sense of what more can we do? How much more can we progress, invent, change? Maybe a lack of happiness with what is. The conservative mindset being more, how do we preserve what has always been? Mm-hmm. And so, the word conformity within that intellectual paradigm is actually a good thing. So it's a, Western man is both. We have two sides to us, right? We must, we've survived thousands of years of hard winters. We've survived wars. We still exist as a people, but at the same time, we put a robot on Mars. So like that's risk taking. That's breaking the mold. That's progress. So we have to have a balance between progress and preservation. These are just some kind of a whole new mindset that I'm trying to bring here. And also culture and arts, they have life cycles. So, for example, like, let's say, think about the music your dad listened to compared to what you listen to. And then, like, I look at the music my son listens to, and I'm trying to find ways to identify with that. And I can see a continuity to echo Nullus. I see the continuity, and that's cultural. That's a good thing. And so every generation is going to reinvent themselves in their own voice and way. So if Imperium Art gets to a point where people are rebelling against it, that means it's good, that there's another generation that is revitalizing it and carrying it on. And then those kids will grow up and have their own kids and look at them and say, oh wow, they've reinvented this Imperium Art stuff. So I'm just throwing an entirely different angle on the entire question. I'm not worried at all at this point that there's any kind of issue of conformity.
Great.
So, we want to continue with your questions?
Sure. Perhaps if Imperium Art were less an ideology of art and more of an intentional community for artists, the desired result may come to fruition unencumbered by the limitations of ideology. The hippies had Laurel Canyon, and at least for now, the art right has the internet. And it is true that every movement in art and music each epoch is defined by certain characteristics or traits that distinguish it from that which came before, then invariably Imperium Art, if it is to find its own character, will accomplish this. I say this all to caution against putting the cart before the horse. To be an artist is to love a life of discovery and invention. The sovereignty of the artist must be preserved for true art to once again influence our society for the better. Perhaps an Imperium Art will ensure this. My hope is that it does.
I can just jump in if you don't mind, Donald.
Sure.
So I think that this is exactly one of the points, the main messages of Imperium Art, at least from my point of view, that Imperium Art is, among other things, an existential point of so it's an existential realm, if you will, where artists of many different cultures, ideological backgrounds, religious backgrounds, all of European descent can congregate in this existential realm we call the Imperium. And within the Imperium, we congregate, we collaborate, we learn from each other, we evolve together, but we still keep our distinguishing characteristics. And I make a point of this in my essay on the nationalist level, where I make a point of saying that we are a large community of distinctive cultures, of distinctive historic experiences, of distinctive religious experiences, and what have you. So we can't, we have to find this overarching message in the Imperium where we can congregate and we don't lose ourselves in the Imperium. And that's what makes the difference between the word Imperium and Imperial. Because the Imperial, if you were to say Imperial, then that would be, we would be imposing something on everyone. And when I say the Imperium, I think of it more as a state of mind, if you will, where I can go into the Imperium and I can meet friends from anywhere in Europe, anywhere in the United States, and I can exchange my ideas, show them, and be maybe even an ambassador of my particular experience, and still become and stay who I am. So I think that this is an important part of Imperium Art. So I hope that this answers that paragraph, Josh.
Would you continue, Josh?
Sure. In an age such as ours, which in part demands that we pursue our passion, we find a curious absence of that important dimension of the human experience all around us. Often we hear about the importance of authenticity, but how is it that we so often find ourselves challenged by its antipode? Authenticity, sincerity, these essential qualities of our spirit can only come to fruition through courageous and honest confrontations with life. In popular media, what passes for authenticity is rarely more than the public airing of aggrievements and vexations. Primetime interviews about struggles with mental health, fawning reality television shows about messy divorces, these are often anything but authentic. But this is not to say that an Imperium art should concern itself with authenticities of the positive alone. The truth of pain and suffering are as important and enriching to a people as are stories of love and heroism. If anything, an Imperium art ought to concern itself with a confrontation of the real, and offer a means by which artists may represent themselves in their work with honesty and integrity, for those are the foundations of the sincere and the authentic.
I think that's beautifully said, and I certainly can align with that. So we're at this point, I really want to say we're grateful for your joining into this dialogue and adding what you feel it should be. Again, co-authoring with us. So we're very grateful for your wisdom and your insights.
Well, thank you for having me.
So I wanted to add to this with the concept that what I wrote about also again, and again, I'm sorry that I constantly reference my essay, but I think that it does help somewhat. And I talk about embracing the full emotional spectrum in what I call the cognitive dominance in the culture insurgency, which again ties back to my theory that we lost the culture war and we have to understand ourselves in a position where we are in a culture insurgency, which is not, again, I'm not trying to blackpill anyone with this, but what I'm trying to say is we have to take a very honest and realistic approach to where we stand. And by doing so, we can then appropriately strategize and understand how we can move forward. So when you're in a position of a culture insurgency, you have to be able to keep your cool. Grace is the word I'm looking for here. So authenticity is reflected through grace, through class, through being, and not class in the social context, but class in the style context, right? Or in the behavioral context. So you want to be able to be someone that has grace under fire, that can hold themselves together in this barrage of degeneracy that we see around us, and can take all this information and still provide a message that's a positive message, but does not necessarily hide the full emotional spectrum. We need to embrace our anger. We need to embrace our violent desires. We need to embrace our frustrations, our sadness, everything, in addition to our joy and our happiness. So we need to express all of this, the full emotional spectrum, but we need to do it in a way where we don't lose ourselves in the emotion itself. And that's where this balance is very important.
On that point, I think of Pantera, Great Southern Trendkill is a good example of that, or Dirt by Alice in Chains, or Scorsese's whole career, where you have depictions of human evil, the shadow, pain, suffering, greed, abuse, indulgence, and it's not fawning, it's not Sunday school hits you over the head with the Bible, gee golly, isn't that bad? Yep. It's just a naked depiction of the of the thing as it is.
Yeah.
And I think that's a healthy culture is a culture that would have the maturity and the ability to present things like that, and not revel in the shit, so to speak. Like I think of that song by Billie Eilish. Good golly, what's the name of the song? Bad Guy? Is that what it's called?
I don't really listen to her music, but go on.
I don't either, but I've kind of absorbed it through just too much time with it.
It's around, yeah.
And it's all about her banging her fellow 16-year-old friends' dads, I think.
Wow.
And it's
wow.
I hope I'm not overstating it too much or sensationalizing it, but I mean that's kind of one of the lines is I'm bad guy, sleep with your dad type, something like that.
Yeah.
And you could have a film where you depict a Lolita type that's a victim of sinfulness and does all these terrible things and is a driver of malevolence in some artistic depiction. And let it be what it is rather than sensationalize it or glorify it or elevate the model of that message to the standard of a what's the word I'm looking for? An exemplar.
Yeah. I really want to jump in right now. For starters, I have to say that in the arts or as an artist, it's very easy to make kind of negative, degrading, demoralizing art, and it's very hard to make uplifting, moralizing, positive art. It's that's partly why we see so much of it. The other half is that we're like the capitalist culture in America is a youth culture where they focus on, the angst of teens and this kind of garbage, and so that's sort of the milieu that we're in. That's the cultural time we're in. I believe that, well, let me start off by saying I'm in the middle of writing and being in a film that is about our people. It's an Imperium Art film, and it's going to take months to complete, but I'm part of I'm co-authoring it, and that's the mission of the film, is to, in a sense, start from the bottom and work our ways up, and to show the transformation of our people currently in the degeneracy and how they work together to reconnect with their history, their family, their destiny, their Western biospirit. And so that's that and it's got to be done in a way that isn't stupid, cheesy, preachy. That's very hard to do. It's so easy to say the things that Billie Eilish says, or any of those type of degenerates. I would say the majority of rap music is about murder and pimping and this kinds of things. So how is that helping that culture? Right?
Yeah,
It's like tying a rock to your foot and jumping in the water. So we as Imperium artists have a tremendous challenge that's much harder than the general people in the arts around us, which is to uplift and to bring us out of the darkness.
If you want to use hip hop as an example, one of my, I'll listen to him any day of the week, DMX, and not just because he's also from New York, has a very brutally honest, unglamorous depiction of a life of hardship and violence and everything that you associate with like street tough, hoodlum ruffian behavior.
Ghetto culture.
Yeah. And it's not, he's very frank about it. He's like, that was bad. And people should listen to it and be like, that's bad. But it's not, the song isn't DMX like talking about how bad it is to do the things he's doing. It's just presented as is. Compare that to a Nas or a Jay-Z where it's like, yes, I'm on my yacht from all of the killings and drug dealings I've done.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry. Go on, Nullus. Your turn.
I mean, I do this in my poetry all the time. I mean, I write about, in my poem Circles of Hell, for example, I depict a very dark world, and I just present it as it is. I don't want to sugarcoat it. I am not glorifying it. I want to avoid any kind of self-indulgence in it, whether that's feeling sorry for myself or whether it's glorifying it. All of that is put aside. All I'm doing in that particular poem is presenting the way the world, I see the world, and how I see the kind of things that we're experiencing right now on a very grounded level, street level, if you will. And then I have poems that are more encouraging, where we have a struggle and we fight and we have to defeat some kind of foe or what have you. And it's put in the story. So different poems, different stories, different messages, The point, I think, at the end of the day, for me at least, is to avoid self-indulgence, to avoid glorification of any kind. And what I mean by glorification of any kind, self-glorification. So let me be very particular about that. Of course, we want to talk about glorifying our culture, our people, our collective, if you will. We want to glorify this. But what we don't want to do is glorify ourselves in this world, right? Because once we do that, then the ego starts taking over. And then once the ego starts taking over and it comes back again, we circle back to the issue of humility and understanding ourselves within the greater, higher purpose, if you will. That's where you sort of understand the message a little better. You're still free to do and express yourself as you want, but you just don't want to wallow in your own ego. That's really what it comes down to. Anyone there?
No, I agree. I don't want to like split hairs in a needless way, but even something like self-indulgence is something that can. I know some of your audience members are going to take umbrage with me saying this, but I'm an advocate of a cautious advocate of the Faustian man, the philosophy of the Faustian man, and there's part of that archetype is self-indulgence.
Mm-hmm.
And pushing it over the limit and then totally bottoming out and destroying everything. There's a larger conversation there, tempering that, how to be mature, sophisticated, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to do all that. Probably don't have time for it. But, there's a virtue in self-indulgence in the fact that the people who are going to strive and create the great works are going to be self-indulgent or have moments of self-indulgence. David Bowie famously doesn't remember the late 70s where he recorded the Berlin albums. And you can present someone as self-indulgent. Again, I'm not saying anything different, and I'm not even really disagreeing with you, but you can present self-indulgence in a certain way, and it can be taken for what it is. But I don't think we should be.
Well, actually, you make a good point, Josh. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you make actually a really good point. By presenting self-indulgence, you're actually not necessarily advocating for self-indulgence. So if that's the way I understand it.
Yeah, it's like the reverse cuties. I'm having child pornography being raised to consciousness by having child pornography in my movie. It's like the actual cuties. Like we're showing it. We're not actually elevating this. We're not participating in it. We're not furthering that end, but we are showing it for what it is.
Yeah, I think of self-indulgence more as when I'm with my canvas and I look at the clock and it's 1 a.m. and I don't know how I spent 8 hours, indulging myself in my art, and not as drug addictions or other types of degeneracy. I think if we indulge ourselves in the arts, in our message, and are bold in the way that we behave as artists and with our mission, then that certainly is glorious, and I think that's part of the true art spirit.
Donald, just 2 points to this. Number one, anyone who does the cuties gets the broom.
No doubt.
But I get your point, Josh. I'm just joking with that. Kind of, sort of, not really, but but all joke, but in all seriousness, I mean, yes, you are going to be self-indulgent when you're creating. I mean, I'm not talking about the creative process of being, you're going to be self-consumed. You're going to be a lot of artists, they sit in a small space or a quiet space or a very private space, and then that's where they're going to create and do whatever they do. And so that is kind of a very self-indulgent process. But what I'm saying is in the expression of the art, right? And again, I'm not even saying take yourself out of it either. No, don't take yourself out of the art. That's, again, not what I'm trying to say. What I'm really trying to say is don't get lost in it, right? So when you're presenting the certain emotional aspect of that, whatever it is that you're expressing, whether it's frustration, sadness, anger, whatever it is, joy, lust, whatever it is that the artist is expressing at that particular moment, just don't lose yourself in it. And really, try to be moral without trying to wag that moral finger at everyone else, because that kind of takes also a little bit away from the authenticity of it.
The way you bring up indulgence, Donald, there's another angle to it, and it's, I guess, one of the reasons why it's hard to have answers to any of these questions, because there's some degree where you want to evaluate these things on a case-by-case basis. So you're talking about indulgence as, well, I just did this activity for X amount of hours. I indulged myself as an artist. Yeah. The other way I'm thinking of it, just as we're kind of going off on this tangent, is you think of, again, we keep saying art. I mean, I really only know music, so hopefully everyone understands that. I think of a egotistically indulgent record or style of recording. I wish I could pull to mind an exact example of this. I can only give like the frame of it, but there's plenty of times where here's Blur would be a good example. Their album Modern Life is Rubbish. They turned in this, I think it was like their second album. They turned in this album to the record label, and it was all this weird stuff, like not nice pop music.
Yeah.
And the record label was like, go back to the studio and give us a goddamn 4-minute song
Right.
or you're fired.
Yeah.
And I don't remember the song that became the big hit from it, but it was a big hit. It was one of the best songs on the album. And, there's something about Indulgence that is kind of like a hit or miss quality, where, you would definitely say this person has kind of gone beyond the limits of good taste and they've passed over any kind of temperance in their approach, and something just becomes very egotistical and bloated and for its own self, overshadowing the whole. Sometimes that works. Sometimes that's really, really good.
Yeah, but if you do that, you have to be really good,
or really likable. But there's some X factor that makes it hard to say definitively, like if you're crafting an equation or a formula, this leads to good self-indulgence.
Yeah.
I couldn't make that formula for you.
I have to say, I think the Rolling Stones do that pretty well sometimes. There's some of their music that, I don't know if the audience likes them or not, and I don't like all of their songs, but
sure, they got a lot of songs.
There's this sloppiness, this overindulgence that occurs that's sort of the spirit of rock and roll, and then other songs where it's just so cringe and annoying and I can't stand it, and why does it work in this song but not in that? It's hard to put your finger on it. So we do have one more paragraph, and there's some important questions there. You were talking about how you wanted to get to some questions at the end.
Okay, so I'll read it then. Should an Imperium Art not then seek to reinvigorate the discipline of the arts with passion? Should it not seek to reconnect man to himself, to his brothers and sisters, and to God above all? Should an Imperium Art not seek to... We've been at this a long time. Should an Imperium Art ought not to seek a definition or redefinition of what art is, especially not in a political sense, as political has been the death of art, but to redefine the conditions by which an artist can truly produce soul-stirring works of passion and vision? I approached this article with the intention of offering something solid. and certain to this new project, but in writing it, I found I only have questions. I hope that they provide useful to my friends Donald, Nullus, and Tyler, and to anyone else who takes this project upon themselves.
So how do you feel? Do you feel that we've answered your questions, or that you've got even more questions? Where are you now?
Well, I've always supported this project, and I think even not hearing you tease out all of the ideas behind this, I implicitly supported it, and I think I probably knew what you were going for when you kicked this whole thing off. So I've always been very supportive of this, and I consider this more of an exercise, and more a for the benefit of people in the audience who are thinking about these things and maybe who are also artists themselves. I've struggled my entire life with considering with being even as I say it now, my stomach is turning in knots. Of being an artist, of being a musician, of being a creative type.
I believe it's, and there's some artiste.
There's something about our modern era where what would otherwise be simple questions like what is work and who is a worker, what is art and who is an artist, suddenly become torturous existential kind of performances or something else to that effect. And so, you've answered all the questions great, and I'm thrilled with all of the answers, and I don't really think I have anything I would prod further at, but just give you guys applause.
You brought up a really, really, really key point, and that is creating content for our people, creating content specifically for our artists. This is a sort of a labor of love. I'm an artist. I'm when I'm working in my studio, I scour YouTube and BitChute for great lectures, audiobooks. That's how, of course, I discovered you and et cetera, et cetera. And so I want to be able to give something to our people. And, I've got, of course, great relationships with our people in the arts, but I also have people reaching out to me that are just starting off. They want to be an artist. They don't have any drawing skills, or they're trying to, say, make a film and they need advice on this or that. And I treat them with utter, absolute respect, because I was there once too. You have to see it that way. And so making content for our people, it's enormously, hugely important. We have to do that. And so that's, again, I remind the audience, first of all, I thank the audience for going on this incredible journey with us. This is a long show with very deep and rich topics. Hope you had your thinking cap on. And so, but it's not over. You have to share it now. You have to comment now. You have to engage us and get involved in this and widen our community. That's what we've been talking about all along.
And Donald, I don't want to take an opportunity to give a shout out to the White Art Collective as well.
Absolutely.
To also say that the encouragement that I personally received there from everyone and all the artists and from Jeff and I just encourage everyone to check it out. Check out the White Art Collective, because what you find there is more than just really good art, I think. You find a community there of people that are willing to listen to your stuff and encourage you to create more. The issue of critique, does come up in the White Art Collective, but I think that'll evolve naturally. But for now, I think the most important aspect that we're focusing on is encouraging everybody, just create, just go out there, just do it. I'm not really, I always tell Donald, I'm just some dude from a living room. I mean, that's who I am, right? So it's not like anyone is any better or more interesting than anyone else. We are just doing our best. We're trying to figure this out. And we want to encourage everyone to critique what we're doing here in this Imperium Art project. The essay that Josh wrote was phenomenal, because it really addressed all these core issues that we've been discussing for all of these episodes. And I hope that people who are listening to this in the audience use this as a means to sort of help understand what we're trying to achieve here, because I guess that if you came in like in the 18th episode, you might not get the whole picture or what have you. So this might be a good episode as a refresher, so to speak.
For sure. So Joshua, any final thoughts or comments before we wrap it up tonight?
Yeah, sure. Well, again, I use my brother as a foil a lot in these conversations because we're both musicians and I know. Oh, you have no idea. In many ways, we're in lockstep, and in just some very significant ways, we're very different. And one thing I always tell him is like, yeah, man, I don't really care what you think. I don't really care about your opinion if you can't tell me why that is your opinion. Why do you have this particular opinion about music or art or the creative process? If you can't tell me about it, then I don't care and it doesn't matter. And it was in that spirit I wrote this essay, because I would like people to think about these things and to be able to have answers, if only to themselves, for why. I'm not saying like forever. I'm not like in some neurotic way, condemning everyone for not being able to have a well thought out worldview or answer to every whim and sensation that they experience. But at least in the broad strokes, what is good? What is bad? Why does that sound good? Why doesn't this sound good? Why do I create this way? Why don't I create another way? Those are kind of simple questions. They have huge implications.
See, and what you're doing by asking those questions, you're going against the sort of the tenets of postmodernism. Right. You're not accepting that just because this garbage is on a wall in a museum that it somehow is art or good in any way. Mm-hmm. Art must go through a very rigorous questioning, critique process. It's something I'm deeply involved in, and that's the education I wish the public had more of, instead of just saying, that's what's alienated us. We're culturally illiterate. It's terrible. I can't even put a sentence together. I hate it. So that's another reason why we do this show. But I have to ask the audience, now you be the judge. How did Nullus and I do tonight on this show? What are your questions? Let's go as far as this thing will go. Okay, so I want to thank you both tremendously for joining us tonight. This was just an amazing show. Nullus and I are very deeply grateful Joshua, for your being here, but also for all the content you've created, all the community you've created. You're a hero to a lot of us. So we're just really grateful and just happy to be your friend.
Oh, I really appreciate that, and it means a lot to me, and I'm glad to be able to turn the tables here and be on your show. On the point about creating things, do you mind if I
of course, go for it.
Shill some stuff?
Yeah, go for it.
So I just finished the manuscript for my new book, and it's going to be properly published, and it will be released in the first quarter of 2021. And I don't want to attribute too many lofty, grandiose words to it, but if I were going to, it might be something like magnum opus, most important book of the century, greatest psychological text since Beyond the Pleasure Principle.
A little self-indulgent there, don't you think?
I mean that about 20 to 30%, some more than others.
Awesome.
But it's called American Extremist, and American Extremist, the psychology of political extremism, and it's everything I've learned in the last couple of years, and it's my attempt to help set things right, I guess.
Fabulous. These are the important things, and I'm just, again, everybody get involved. So where can they find that? I assume that'll just be on Amazon, or do you have a site? Like, where you're mysterious these days, buddy?
Yeah, no, I don't have anything, a central hub that anyone can find stuff, but the publisher will be announced soon. It'll be on Amazon, paperback, ebook, audiobook.
Right. Okay.
The publisher, probably everybody knows.
Right.
They've published some heavy hitters over the years.
Great.
And it'll be good.
Well, listen, get back to us when that happens. We'll be happy to, promote it for you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Beautiful. All right. So thank you, everybody, for joining us on this incredible journey. We send our love and prayers to you. Make good art, build our communities, and take care.